Peace, family. It's Bakari Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative that believes that we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. I'm back once again with another video just covering some of the issues that have been pertinent in the past week with Black America or the Black world. So first and foremost, I'm going to be addressing, there was actually an interview that Michelle Obama did with our sister Gayle King, right? And I say sister in quotation marks, where she was talking about that now that her and her husband are no longer in office, they feel they could finally be freed in their Blackness. So I'm going to get into that just a little bit. Then we're going to talk about critical race theory and why that's such a pertinent issue and it's been in the news. But first and foremost, a lot of people give me a lot of pushback in terms of my constructive criticism of the Obamas and their administration. So I just want to say that there's no hateration, holleration, or in this dancery, right? But part of my pushback, part of my criticism is due to the fact that I believe in a democratic society or system that all elected officials should be held under scrutiny, regardless of their race, right? So many people would argue that since they're Black, they should get a pass. I completely disagree. We know that the Obamas, particularly President Obama's 2 elections, there was an overwhelming amount of Black support. And so as a result, hey, many people have argued he placated every racial minority group in America, but Black people didn't get anything at all. And so we believe, of course, that, hey, we should receive something tangible for our vote, because we know that for Black people have been dealing with a system of maybe the past 60 years of benign neglect from the Democratic and Republican parties. And I also think that when people tend to attack the critic and they're more critical of the critic rather than the actual leader, then that almost is, to me, is representative of a cult-like mentality. So we want to be very, very careful in terms of us doing that. But another issue, of course, with the Obamas was, particularly after the George Floyd's killing, when he was killed, Obama came out and talked about, what we need to do to address this issue and to vote, to protest and engage in activism. But the biggest issue is we know that extrajudicial violence against African Americans, or what some of us like to call police genocide, is an issue that has been omnipresent in America since we came here in 1619. Some people even argue the 16th century, 1500s, but that's neither here nor there. But this is an issue that's been always relevant for Black people, and we've died at the hands of police, in which, of course, we feel unjustly. However, Obama was in office for 8 years, and during that time, there was a rise and a resurgence of white nationalist hate groups, and of course, police killings of unarmed Black people. However, he did nothing to address these issues. I've actually written an op-ed article where I've argued that there needs to be an executive order creating the killings of unarmed citizens a federal crime, punishable by a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years to life. Now, many conservatives, people who are for the law, argue that they are for mandatory minimum sentences. So I believe that there should be a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years to life for any officer who was involved in the killing of an unarmed civilian. Moreover, I think it's also very important that we address this issue and this concept of Michelle Obama being forever our first lady. I understand that she's a very beautiful woman. I understand that she was the most highly educated first lady in the history of the United States of America. Now, she has a sense of grace and so on and so forth. That's cool. I have no problem with that. However, I don't believe that qualifies her to be forever our first lady. I believe that the standard or the template for the African American community to have such an adornment or a love affair with a first lady actually isn't a Black woman. Eleanor Roosevelt, who wasn't by any stretch of the imagination, people would argue, a very attractive woman, but she advocated, legislated, and actually forced her husband to make sure that he allocated tangible benefits for the Black community. For example, Ida B. Wells, Mary Cloud Bethune, Mary Cloud Bethune per se, was part of the Black cabinet for Roosevelt, in which she was make sure she was able to advocate for bread and butter issues for the Black community. We talk about during the Great Depression. After the Great Depression, you had the Great Society and the New Deal. And what happened was Black people weren't receiving the same amount of payments for relief, what we now call welfare, as their white counterparts. Well, what took place was she says, well, we're going to stop the payments until Black people get the proper amount that they're owed. So I think that is what we want to look for someone to be forever our first lady, for someone that we endear ourselves to in terms of being the first lady, but advocating and making sure Black people get what we're owed and what we do in this country, because we all know we built this country. I think that is very important. But the biggest issue that came out of that interview that Michelle Obama had with Gayle King was she said that now we're finally free to be Black. Right. And she talks about the pressure of being the first Black family in the White House, but also how everything they did was scrutinized under the lens of race. I think many Black people can understand that. We live professional lives, we go through college, etc. That these are issues that we deal with. We aren't just seen as professional, but we're oftentimes seen as Black first. Now that could create certain stressors, or some people call racial battle fatigue, in terms of dealing with these different issues in the workplace and home and being under public scrutiny. I understand that. Some of the examples she gave was, of course, when they did a fist bump at a campaign rally, Fox News took off and called it a terrorist fist bump. Absolutely ridiculous. There was another issue talked about where there was a picture of Obama sitting in the Oval Office with his feet up on the table. They represented that as akin to the depiction of Black males in D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, that Black men will be lazy, so on and so forth, and actually run the country into the ground. I understand all of that. However, I believe, of course, we believe here at Lumumba Speaks that we should always bet on Black. So by saying that race shouldn't be a burden, it should be something that we're proud of. I know growing up, we were always taught what? When you leave this home, you're representing not only your family, you're representing your community, you're representing your race. And so we wear that with a badge of pride, right? And many other ethnic groups do that as well. And so I think that's part of the issue, maybe why the Obamas did not focus on actually advocating, legislating laws to protect Black people and actually allow us to actually benefit from the full benefits of the actual Constitution. So that's an issue within itself. But I think that that's something moving forward that we have to be very cognizant of, because we're even seeing this with the Biden administration now, particularly with Kamala Harris. There was a lot of Black girl magic, so on and so forth, which is cool, right? Black women have a swag, but now we're in a situation where we're seeing Black people being killed. We're seeing Black women being killed. We're seeing Black girls being killed by the police, and there's no legislation that's coming out. However, the Asian Americans, which they should have received an executive order, so on and so forth. But where are we? Where's our executive order to protect us against extrajudicial violence, police genocide, white supremacy, etc.? So that's an issue within of itself. And so I think, once again, we have to just look at, we understand that some people may be Black in skin, but that doesn't mean they're Black in mind. And being Black in mind, it means that you put the issues and aspirations of the Black community first and foremost in the ideology of course, Marcus Garvey. So with that being said, I'm going to move forward to critical race theory. Some of you may have seen that the issue of critical race theory has really been in the media for maybe the past 2 weeks, and I don't know if it's been addressed adequately. So I do know that many people on the right, conservatives, Black and white, have railed against critical race theory and stated that critical race theory is teaching people to hate America, it's teaching people to hate white people, so on and so forth. Now, I've even seen some interviews where people are actually advocating against critical race theory, but don't even actually know what it is, right? And so we can see that that's a situation where they're simply towing the party line. So just to give a brief background, critical race theory came out of critical legal studies. Derek Barrow, who was Obama's mentor when he was at Harvard, is one of the primary progenitors of critical race theory. So such same as Kimberly Crenshaw, who was known for coining the term intersectionality to discuss how people with intersecting identities can face oppression in a number of different ways, right? But critical race theory, people are arguing they wanted to be taught in secondary education, K through 12. And that's not the case. Typically, even if you go to college, you're not going to learn about critical race theory unless you go to graduate school or law school. So that's first and foremost. But there are some core tenets to critical race theory. There are several. I'm only going to touch on two. One is that racism is ordinary, right? It's not an aberration. So many people would argue, particularly in the media or on the right, that when there are racial acts, it's an aberration. Oh, this is just a lone wolf. We know that that's not the case, that racism is ordinary, and it's part and parcel part of not only American culture, but also American law. For example, it starts with chattel enslavement, starts with genocide of Native Americans, them being removed from tribal lands, concepts such as manifest destiny and Norman's law, all are representative of racism being what? Ordinary, not an aberration, right? We talk about Jim Crow and Jane Crow laws. We talk about sharecropping, Black codes, right? This is a situation where maybe just a couple of people who feel this way. We're arguing, of course, in critical race theory, and I'm actually a Black crit scholar, but For this topic of discussion today, we're going to talk about critical race theory. That racism is ordinary, not an aberration, and it's made ordinary by it being what? Infused in the law, in the Constitution, in which it still states that Black people are 3/5 of a human being, right? And so that's something that is very important to understand. Secondly, the second tenet of critical race theory that I really want to touch on is this concept of interest convergence. So, critical race theorists argue that elite whites benefit financially from racism, and that working class or poor whites benefit psychically or psychologically from racism, right? And so, as a result of them benefiting from this politically, socially, economically, and psychologically, why would they actually try to stop something that they're benefiting from? They also argue that the only time white people as a whole, particularly in terms of the law, engage in any type of racial reform is when it actually benefits them in the long run. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of that. For example, many people would argue that the civil rights movement and Black Power movements transformed the character and nature of American society. And as a result, that led to what the integration of historically white or publicly predominantly white institutions such as University of Nebraska, University of Florida, Texas A&M, University of Kentucky, etc., to Black students, right? And it was because of this push, this push to change the laws, this push of more persuasion, right? A la Dr. King, that caused this to happen. However, research shows that that wasn't the case. There was actually two seminal incidents, acts that took place that led predominantly white institutions to integrate. The first was 1965, Texas Western University, now known as UTEP, all Black starting five defeated the all-white University of Kentucky's basketball team under Adolph Rupp. And as a result, Black head coaches stated, well, I'm sorry, predominantly white institutions, basketball head coaches stated what? We have to recruit Black players because they're able to defeat us. Second was September 1971, Legion Field, Birmingham, Alabama. The integrated USC football team went into Alabama, Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama, and beat Bear Bryant's all-white Alabama Crimson Tide, 42-21. I believe the running back at the time was Sam Cunningham, 6'3", 245 pounds. He had 3 touchdowns on only 11 carries. As a result, that led to white institutions, football coaches saying what? We have to recruit Black players. So as a result of that, it was an interest convergence, not rooted in racial justice, but in what? Regaining their superiority on the basketball court and the gridiron. And of course, as we see today, that also led to what? Them having a financial windfall in which the TV deals and the money they receive from bowl games has caused these institutions to lap significantly historically Black colleges and universities known as HBCUs financially. So just once again, just wanted to do a weekend review and touching on critical race theory, the issues there. Two very important tenets that I ascribe to is one, that racism is ordinary, not an aberration, and of course, interest convergence, meaning that white people as a whole tend to only engage in acts of racial justice when it actually benefits them in the long run. Then, of course, once again, we discuss my constructive criticism of Michelle Obama and the Obama administration. Just want to leave you once again with what I said about Michelle Obama. If she is to be forever our first lady, she should have advocated primarily, wholly, and consistently for tangible benefits that have been allocated to the Black community here in America, as her predecessor of many generations before, Eleanor Roosevelt, did during the New Deal. Once again, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. It's Bakari Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black Empowered initiative. I'm out. Peace.